Instagram. Hello, Facebook. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I don't even know why I say that 3 times every time, but welcome to this week's Ask Schellie segment. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, Instagram, and welcome, Facebook. I believe it's 12 o'clock. I have everything turned off here in my office, just rebooting things and just revamping things here. Hello, Tamara. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this week's Ask Schellie segment. My name is Schellie Fan. I am your emotional intelligence expert. I am the founder and CEO of Ask Schellie Consulting, where through the provision of psychoeducation, take corporations and businesses, ministries, small and large businesses to their next level. That is what I do with Ask Schellie. And I'm working on a project right now, just to give you an example of something that I do on a day-to-day basis. It is an owner or 2 owners of a string of group homes, residential group homes for problem adolescents. And they're having issues with bringing on staff that understand the importance of honoring and maintaining boundaries. So we are creating a personality profile for their example, for their expectation, a profile for the perfect employee, a profile of the perfect manager for that position. And so I'm working with the owners and trying to figure out what that looks like. How does that person need to think? How does that person need to respond to issues? How does that person need to be in terms of organization? We're creating this profile, and what we're gonna do is after this profile is set, when we start recruiting, we already have what it is we're looking for. It doesn't matter how awesome you interview. It doesn't matter how you woo the interviewers. If you do not score or respond in a certain way, you will not get there goes my earring. You will not get that position. It's as simple as that. So we're creating the profile, and I'm going to run all of their recruitment for them. That's just an example of something that I do as an emotional intelligence expert. I am a licensed psychotherapist, and I have been doing this for over 23 years. I'm a co-owner of an agency here in Orlando, providing services between the ages of 2 to 99, specializing in self-esteem and motivation in women. And I absolutely love what I do. I get asked questions all the time as a licensed psychotherapist, so I use this platform to share a question with all of you in the hopes that you can take it as a tool for yourself or share it with a loved one, family, or friend, in order for them to supply their wellness toolbox. And so today I will be sharing a question with all of you, actually something that I got as recent as last night, had a different plan, had a different question that I was going to share today. But the question that I received last night was so relevant, I chose to highlight this question on today. I want to make sure that I say, and I thank you to all of you who give such amazing feedback, constructive criticism as well, to help me to be the best version of myself as an emotional intelligence expert. I do want to make sure that everyone is clear and understands that this is in no way an attempt to replace therapy. That is a therapeutic journey between a licensed professional and a person who has made the decision to do the work in becoming who they want to become, do the work to change their situation, do the work to attract those desired outcomes. And so that is therapy. It requires informed consent and an agreement with self that this is something I'm going to do. I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable in this process and to pair up with someone that I trust and take this journey to optimal wellness. When I share on this platform, I'm sharing a perspective and a response, and I would love for you guys to do the same as well. We are all experts, and I would love for you to share this live, and also to share your response. Comment. I would love to hear what you have to say. This is not a fashion statement for those of you who just logged on. My earring just fell. But guess what? I'm going to move on. Here we go with this week's Ask Schellie segment question. Dear Ask Schellie, I called out of work yesterday and feel completely stupid. I am completely shocked about the Kobe Bryant tragedy. His death the death of the other families, earthquakes, fires, political unrest, impeachment. How much more can we take? I feel vulnerable and very emotional. I have never met Kobe Bryant personally, but I am a fan and I am completely crushed. What right do I have to be this upset? His wife lost her husband and daughter. An entire family was on the helicopter and are gone. People lost people they love. I can go on and on. None of this makes sense. So for those of you who are on, please share your response and how you're feeling about the Kobe Bryant tragedy. I know that our timelines are flooding with responses and reactions to this tragedy. For those of you who just logged on, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the question and provide my response. I would love your response as well. Hey, Sade, thank you so much for logging in. Hey, Gary, Jimmy. Hey, TJ. Thank you guys so much for logging in. Hi, Soapbox. Thank you so much. You're in two different places. I love it. So I would like to, I'd like for you guys to share, comment on how you are feeling about this as well. I'm going to talk about why it's so important to talk about it. I'm going to repeat the question. Dear Ask Schellie, I called out of work yesterday and feel completely stupid. I am completely shocked about the Kobe Bryant tragedy. His death, the death of the other families, earthquakes, fires, political unrest, impeachment. How much more can we take? I feel vulnerable and very emotional. I have never met Kobe Bryant personally, but I am a fan and I am completely crushed. What right do I have to be this upset? His wife lost her husband and daughter. An entire family was on the helicopter and are gone. I can go, people lost people they love. I can go on and on and on. None of this makes sense. TJ says, I'm devastated. Bree says he will be missed. Sade says, fighting it. It's so much on my heart. So this person, one of the highlighted parts of this this question or this input, this email that I received is she or he says, what right do I have to be this upset? What right do I have to be this upset? Now listen, I had an emotional response. All of us are having an emotional response to this, right? And I had my own moments, when I first learned of it, I was getting a pedicure and they had the breaking news about the earthquake. And in the little bottom of that little CNN, the little red highlighted area, it went by so fast I missed his name, but saw where it said died in a helicopter crash. And when his picture came up, I almost vomited. It was very, very shocking. On last night, my son was listening to an interview that Kobe had some time ago where he talks about why he started to use the helicopter as a means of transportation. He talked about one day being stuck in traffic after working out and doing his media and things like that and I think it was like a play or something that his daughter or one of his daughters was in. And he indicated that I no longer wanted to miss those important parts of my daughter's lives. And so he started to use the helicopter to make sure that he got into the carpool line because these were things that he valued with being so busy, just being in the carpool line. And oh my God, it brought me to tears. And I did not question it. I didn't say, what right do I have? We understand that we may not have known him personally, but we are still responding emotionally. And this writer is saying it doesn't make sense. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling so emotional? This is not someone that I even know personally. And I want to break that down today. Grief is an emotional response to someone or something lost, right? That was of value. Let me repeat that. Grief is an emotional response to something, to the loss of something or someone that was of value. Okay? That is grief. Grief is the emotional response to the loss of something or someone that was of value. So when you think about that, It doesn't say the emotional response to someone that you knew. It doesn't say the emotional response of someone that you met. It doesn't say the emotional response of something human that breathes. It says it is the definition, how I'm defining grief is the emotional response to the loss of something or someone that was of value. So that means that it could be an icon like Kobe that crushed mediocrity and redefined the definition of superior in his industry. He was a person of value. We can hear a story of someone that we don't even know. I remember, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, someone talked about the death of children. It was a grandmother who every day does her daughter a favor by going and picking up the children from school. And this was just another regular day. She was coming home from picking them up from school, and someone jumped the median. I think they finally concluded that the person was texting, and way across on the other side of traffic, jumped the median, crashed into the vehicle, and all the children passed, except for the grandmother. She lived. When I heard that story, I don't know their names, never met the people, but my eyes teared up because children, we value children. We value lives of young ones, right? And so it is very possible to grieve whether you knew the person or not. So we're having this emotional response, and do you have the right to feel the way that you feel? Absolutely, because this was a person that was of value to us. We are crushed about his daughter being in the helicopter. We are crushed about this story. All of the lives that were lost and all the people that are grieving are probably in a state of devastation even right now. So do we have the right to feel, even though we are not members of his family or someone that we've never touched or met? And the answer is yes. Listen to the definition of grief. It is an emotional response to the loss of something or someone that is of value. So that means that we can grieve the loss of a salary. We could grieve the loss of relationships. We can grieve the loss of our youth and our adolescence. We can grieve the loss of our homes. There are so many things that we can grieve, and because we believe that grief should only be applied to this, a family member, someone you know that no. And the thing is that a lot of the times when we are experiencing this emotional response, we don't even understand what it is. I met someone a couple of weeks ago, and there was just this energy of grief all around her. And I had to ask, like, are you happy? Is everything okay? She's like, yeah. Did you experience any recent loss? No, I'm fine. Everything is cool. But I know what it is I felt. I know what it is that was rattling on the inside of my spirit, in my gut. And then later on, she came back to me and she said, I had to really think about your question. And I have to say, yes, I am. I've lost so many things in the past several years. Lost people, lost supporters, lost friends that I thought were with me. I lost my health, my health changed. And because my health changed, my life changed. So understand that grief can hit us in so many, many different ways. The loss of so many different things and people as well. It's important that I make that very, very clear. Let's talk about emotions and how delicate they are. Emotions are so delicate. I used to oversee a therapist. Gotta hear this. I used to oversee a therapist who was treating adolescents with severe eating disorders. One of the severe cases in a residential home that she worked in was a young boy who was about 15 or 16 years old, Hispanic male, who was in there for anorexia. So this is not eating. And so he was diagnosed with it at about 11 years old. And when I read the profile, it was amazing. Listen to this, guys. So when he was about 11 years old, there was some family that came in from Puerto Rico that hadn't seen the family in years. Now, this is a well-to-do family living out in Windermere, and they invite family over from Puerto Rico, and they come in and they haven't seen him in years. And so one of the family members, who's an uncle, comes in and says, "Gordito," and pinches his nipple. Gordito is like a term of endearment. It means fat boy, right? And so the uncle Gordito presses his nipple and gives him a hug, and that was the last time that boy ate a regular meal. He went on what they thought was a hunger strike. He had to be hospitalized. He was hospitalized for weeks and weeks and weeks. Finally, they discharged him to this residential program. What happened emotionally in that moment with the pinch of the nipple and the uttering of that term of endearment, fat boy? What happened emotionally to cause this boy to be diagnosed or end up with symptomology associated with an eating disorder? What happened in that exchange? I have the nurse that I've talked about here before, the emergency room nurse whose mother passed away. She threw herself into work. She planned this elaborate funeral. She planned this elaborate repast. After everything was over, just making sure, handling the estate and all the paperwork, and then went right back to work. Didn't give herself time to grieve. We're talking about grieving. Didn't give herself time to grieve. Threw herself back into work. And one night, as she's driving into work, again, she's an emergency room nurse. It was about midnight. She gets to a red light, and her life changed, guys. At that red light, her life has never been the same. At that red light is where she experienced her first visual and auditory together hallucination. And she knew it wasn't real, but something happened at that red light. There was an emotional break that happened in that moment. She drove herself to the emergency room, and 10 years later, she is institutionalized at a state hospital. What happened at that red light? We have to be very careful about not taking our emotions, sweeping it under the rug, not process them, or not giving ourselves the right to feel. We have the right to feel. And as soon as we start to say, this is not right, I didn't even know him, it doesn't make sense, that I feel this way, and keep on moving. No, you need to sit and you need to feel. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in this live. Thank you, Marlene. She says, thank you for answering the call. Bree says, yes, we have the right to be sad and emotional about people who are famous or family or friends, right? Just people of value, period. People of value, period. So I want to talk about stories. And let me go back. Let me go back about ignoring emotions. This is very important too. Emotions is a form of communication. A lot of the times our emotions is communicating to our consciousness what's happening in our inner world. I gotta repeat that. I have to repeat that. Our emotions is a form of communication. And most of the time, it is communicating to our consciousness what is happening in our inner world. And this is why it is important to be mindful of your emotions, sit in your emotions, and find an effective way to process your emotions, to move your emotions. We all need emotional bowel movements, is what I call it. Emotional bowel movements. What does that mean? I said this on a live the other day about a loved one, someone that I know, right? Someone that I know that had to be hospitalized last week for not being able to have a bowel movement for over a week. They knew that it was serious when this person started belching and it smelled like feces, followed by episodes of vomiting that also smelled like feces. I actually think that the actual vomit was feces. Whatever the story is, it reminds us that things that are toxic have to get out, and they will find their way out somehow. And if we don't start giving ourselves the right to feel to feel the things that we feel, our emotions are going to find a way out. It becomes very toxic. Emotional hoarding is toxic to our souls, and we have to find a way to effectively process them, because whether you do it voluntary or not, it will find its way out. Whether it finds a way out in your hairline, whether it finds a way out in your menstrual cycle, whether it finds its way out in the way that you respond to people, find its way out in the way that you think, messing up your brain patterns and your brain waves and your vibrations. We have to give ourselves the right to feel. And it doesn't always have to make sense. The fact that you had to call out yesterday because you were feeling way too vulnerable, there were all these emotions going on, the Kobe tragedy, all this loss, our timelines are flooded with pictures. If you needed time to sit, then you needed time to sit, and it is okay. Let me talk about stories. All right, so this is when just trying to figure out like how we get to this point where we can't really deal with things. So I'm not going to give you all the psychobabble, so I'm going to just try to keep this as simple as possible. But we interpret the world in a series of stories, right? This is the way that we understand our world. And these stories, when the story doesn't play out as we expect a lot of the time, it causes chaos. Because it's like, this is not how it's supposed to go. Because this is how the story is supposed to go. It seems very simple, but allow me to break it down a little bit more. So here we have Kobe. I was in college. I think I was going into my junior year at the time. This is a gentleman. He went straight from high school and went to the NBA, and he just, soared. And then, we watched him soar and beat odds, and then he gets married. He starts to have children. We watched him go through that little hiccup in life where opposition came, and he was able to redeem himself and his reputation and just continue to crush the game. We've seen him with his daughters. We hear the story, and this was not how the story was supposed to end. And so it leaves us at this place like, wait, this doesn't make sense. We have stories. Babies get born and they have childhoods and they grow up and they go to school. And so when we hear that a child was born and only lived 2 or 3 days, when we go to a funeral and the casket is this big, it's not what happened to the story. This is not how the story is supposed to go. We are not, as adults, as parents, anyone who's parents on the line, give a shout out, say, hey, I'm a parent if that's a parent. We are not expecting to we're not expecting to outlive our children. That's not how the story is supposed to go. And so when the story doesn't go the way we expect, it causes conflict and this emotional response that most of the world is feeling right now. Let me give you an idea of a different way, or just a different way that the same thing applies. Oftentimes I found, especially when I was working with the developmentally disabled population, that there's a story that's created there. Right? I'm going to specifically talk about a story with a male and his mom. And so the story is, I'm a mom, I'm a single mom, I'm raising this child. He is developmentally disabled. And so our story includes his therapy, his behavior analyst that comes 4 times a week, going to the doctor to address his medical issues that are also associated with other developmental disabilities. He doesn't speak, he doesn't eat, he can't go to school. This is our story until you hire somebody by the name of Robin Williams, a board certified behavior analyst crushing the game in her field, one of the best in this region, that comes into this home and starts to blow the mind of this parent and other extended family members. So now all of a sudden, this child is now learning to eat. And now this child is learning how to speak. And now the child can speak his mind. And now the child is a teenager about to become 18 and become an adult. Now you don't have to sign forms for the child anymore because this person that was incompetent is now competent, can speak for himself, can dress for himself. And this is not how the story was supposed to go. And so now you start to cancel appointments, and now you start to sabotage treatment, because now that he's getting better, what happens to the story and what happens to my value? This is how I define my value. This is how I fit into this universe. This was my space in this universe, being a caregiver. And now all of a sudden he's no longer sick anymore, and the story has changed, and I am in shambles because this was not how the story was supposed to go. I don't know how many times when children start to get better in therapy and they're going back to these family units that were dysfunctional, that blame this child, that blame this person, it's because, she's a cutter, she's depressed, she has to go to therapy. We can't go out because she will burn the house down, and now she starts to get better, and she starts getting great grades in school, and she is starting to thrive in sports, and she is deciding to go off to college, and mom and dad are looking at each other, and they have no marriage, and they have no friendship, and they don't have any other meaning in life but then just pouring out into the problem child. And now the story has changed. And what happens when the story changes? What happens when the story doesn't end the way that you expected? Sometimes when you create a dark story for yourself, even the good then becomes challenging because this is not the way the story was supposed to end. Husband, you were supposed to continue to be horrible. You were supposed to continue to cheat, and now you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do, and I'm still stuck in this space, and this is not how the story was. We have to be careful about our stories. We have to be aware of our stories, because what will help us to overcome and persevere when the story doesn't actually play out the way we expect it is perseverance. Perseverance. Being strong and being flexible in life when the story does not play out the way that you expected. Parents, we have to stop being so overprotective over our children that we are not allowing them to learn how to be to learn how to persevere through the story when it doesn't end the way that you like. When we continue to hover and just smother our children, they do not build the ability to handle undesired outcomes, and they can emotionally break when the story doesn't play out the way that we expected. We have to allow our children to learn and persevere through undesired outcomes, so when the story doesn't play out, they have the perseverance, they have the strength, and they have the wherewithal, and they have the well to persevere through it. Stop smothering your children. Stop, allow them to learn, teach the skill of flexibility so that we are able to navigate through these situations and these periods and these seasons of time when the story just didn't end the way that we expected. And this Kobe situation, the story didn't end the way that we expected. And so be mindful of your story. It's important to be able to learn the skill set that's needed. The skill set that's needed to be strong enough to persevere when the story didn't end the way that we expected. Hi, Robin. Thank you for tuning in. I was giving you a shout out on how great you are and talking about how when children get well, sometimes those parents need to relearn their identities. And no, you're not sabotaging this child's progress because you don't have a space or to stand. You don't have an identity anymore now that this child is doing. We have to learn how to persevere when the story doesn't go the way that we expected. Know your story. We all have them. We all have these stories that play out in our minds, and we have to be resilient. That's a skill. That is a skill. Resilience, being able to persevere when the story doesn't end the way that we expected. So Ali, hello, Watts. She's saying that we have to stop enabling people and let them have their own story. Let your children have their own story. It's important. Let go. Let them learn. Let them persevere. Let them find their way. It's important. So now let's talk about what happens. What happens now? Here we are. We see all the pictures. It hurts. He's gone. And they are probably planning funerals. His daughter is gone. There was a family of 3 on the helicopter. They're gone. It happened. It happened. A route that he took probably multiple times a week ended in this tragedy. And so now what? Where do we go from here? It's important to understand that grief happens and people experience grief in so many different ways. So many different ways. There is stages to grief, but sometimes I get afraid to teach that because people start to feel like, well, I didn't go through it this way, or maybe I got stuck in some, everybody navigates through the stages of grief differently. Sometimes we get stuck in different stages of grief. We process death in different ways. And so understand that when I'm giving you this information, understand that there's so much uniqueness to how people experience this, how people experience grief. So just some tips on how you can navigate through this tragedy and all of the posts and all of the things that we're going to hear more. We're going to hear more. I'm sure his loved ones are going to start to go public, and other basketball players and coaches, etc., etc. How do we navigate through this? So understand, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of how you're feeling. We know that it's important to understand that your emotions is language, is communication. Your inner world is communicating to your consciousness. And so a lot of times we're reminded of our own mortality, right? Our own mortality and where we are with that. We're reminded that, wow, life could be gone like this. And for some of us, that's a very scary thought. How life could just, the word says that life is a vapor. And so it creates this anxiety, this emotional response that many of us are feeling. So the stages of grief, it starts with denial, right? It can start with denial, like this didn't happen. How many of us right here on these lives, how many of us entered into denial almost immediately? This is fake news. This can't be. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. How many of us? That's one of the stages of grief. And that's usually one of the first things that we feel when we're grieving. How many of you who are listening experience that? I'm getting some hearts with that. How many? I see a hand here. It's like, what? No, this didn't happen. Is there another Kobe Bryant? Did he have no, And think about people that you love. We're not just talking about Kobe, right? We're talking about the people that we love, the things that we love. When the market crashes and you're like, that didn't just happen. No. I put my whole life into this investment. I put everything into this investment. Did that just happen? I remember driving away from the last center because we closed 3 community mental health centers a couple of years ago. And I remember driving away and thinking, am I really doing this? I sacrificed everything. Time with my children, my marriage. And I'm driving. Is this really happening? Right? We tend to go into denial. And some people get stuck there. When they're coming in for therapy, they're like, I'm still picking up the phone and calling and listening to this person's voice on this voicemail. And I'm just like, huh? Oh yeah, he's gone. That's right. He's gone or she's gone. How many of you have done that? How many of you experienced that? L.H. Henderson says yes. Yeah, she felt denial or had felt that before. Dominique says your message always comes right on time. That denial is serious. There are people years later. I had a client whose son was murdered on Christmas Day. This was about 3 years ago. She had this memorial corner or something like that was in her home. And at first it was okay. She had the pictures, she had all of his pictures, the things that he loved to eat, his favorite sneakers and all that was good. But after 2 or 3 years, it was I don't know. She would go to this corner and she would speak to him and felt that this is where, and I guess there's really nothing wrong with that, but then there kind of is too, because she wouldn't leave the home because she felt that she was leaving him in the home. And denial plays out in so many different ways. And this is how our defense mechanisms say, wait, this didn't happen. We can't cope with this right now. This wasn't the story, so I'm rejecting it. So now we understand that's one of the stages of grief, denial. Then there's anger. Like, you just get angry. Angry at the person who passed, angry at yourself, angry at the world, angry at all the posts. Like, can people stop posting about this? Angry about, like, why do you have to buy a helicopter anyway? Like, is that how rich people do it? And then just this anger. Just anger at your husband for whatever, angry at the family members because they didn't come to the funeral or they didn't contribute to the funeral, or, angry that the programs don't look good, and angry that the food is cold at the repast, and just anger and being stuck in that anger, snapping at people. And all of it is because there's some movement that needs to happen emotionally that's not anger. And then there's bargaining. All right, so we talked about denial, we talked about anger. Then there's bargaining. And this is when we say things like, if only. Oh, so L.H. Henderson says, I think this was my longest phases between anger and denial. Thank you so much, L.H. Henderson. One of the things, in case I missed it, understand that you can go through all the stages of anger, get to acceptance, and then all of a sudden be triggered back to anger or back to denial. So this is not like sequential. It all depends on the person, how they navigate through these stages. So bargaining is, if only I could have, if only I would have, I should have. And that's another very, very delicate space to be, because when you start bargaining, you bust open the doors to guilt. I didn't, so I couldn't, so I should have, but I didn't, so. And then it creates this guilt. And that guilt can also cause this next stage of grief, which is depression. Just feeling down, feeling sad, feeling unmotivated, maybe going through stages where you're feeling apathy, like not feeling anything, just feeling numb. I have someone who is still grieving the loss of her mother and really, really stuck between the denial and the anger, and going back and forth, kind of like what L.H. Henderson just said. And her depression is manifest in the form of apathy, just not really feeling anything, just kind of like blah. And she just lost her grandmother, who was her mother's mother, just lost her grandmother. She just kind of like, I didn't feel anything. I didn't cry. I'm not emotional about it, and that happens. And that happens, that depression causes apathy. So we talked about denial. This didn't happen. Talk about feeling anger, that bargaining. I should have, I could have, I should have visited more. I could have visited more. I should have been in New York and helped transfer my aunt out of that hospital sooner. We start to do that, and that can cause guilt. The next stage is depression. But the final stage that we hope as therapists, and just anybody, is that we get to a place of acceptance, where we just accept that this is what it is. This was not the intended story. This is not what I hoped for, but this is how it ended. And I accept it, and I can move on. Okay? So again, in response to where do we go from here? Awareness of where you are, awareness of where you are emotionally, awareness of where you are in these stages of grief is important. The second thing is make sure that you are processing your emotions. We talked about emotional bowel movements earlier. Process your emotions, and people process differently. And there are 3 ways that I like to teach my clients to process. One is auditory, through auditory means, and that can be just taking your phone and talking, like a diary, auto diary, and just talking about your emotions, and then making sure that you play it back and listen to it. So that's talking into a recorder, into your phone, and then playing it back. And then, of course, writing is very, very powerful. Journaling, writing down your emotions, journaling, and processing it that way. As a therapist, I believe that talking is a very, very powerful way of processing. And it's important that even when you're doing it through auditory means, or even when you're doing it through writing, that you also include processing through talking, moving your emotions that way. Talk to people. I felt good after talking to my son last night and listening to him talk about, like, all my friends are devastated. Like, that's it. Like, that's basketball. Like, that's who we knew. This is how we were motivated. This is how I've watched millions of videos on Kobe, and so we just talked, and it felt good to just talk. So talk it through, talk your emotions through, not only as it relates to Kobe, but just your emotions in general. That is why therapy is so important. You don't have to be sick, mentally ill, dysfunctional, seeing and hearing things all the time to get therapy. It could just be your inability to make decisions, not sleeping well, having relationship issues. Make sure that you have an avenue to process your emotions. It's very important. And the last thing that is very, very powerful when it comes to what do we do now? Allow yourself to really analyze the changes that you can make in your life. I think that's important too. And not doing it in an emotional way, because when you're doing things out of emotion, it doesn't last. It doesn't stick. It just doesn't. So being aware of where you are in your grief, making sure that you have a powerful and consistent way to process your emotions through talking, through journaling, through an auto diary, but making sure that you're moving your emotions. A therapeutic bowel movement, an emotional bowel movement. We do not want our emotions to get stuck all up in there and get toxic, nasty, and stank and start to create emotional tumors. We don't want that either, right? So have a means that every week or every 2 weeks you are processing your emotions. And then the last part is make it make sense. Make it make sense. And when I say make it make sense, like allow this tragedy to be converted into something extremely positive. We shouldn't allow tragedy to do that. We shouldn't allow calamity to give us the motivation to change. But all of us have things in our lives that we can improve on. And when we realize just how this idea of tomorrow not being promised, like even just when I was about to say that, here we are. This is what it looks like. This is what tomorrow is not promised looks like. Okay? What were his last words? Nessa, we'll be back in 2 hours. Hey, I'm out. Let's go. We're late. Let's go. What was it? We do things like 5 minutes is promised. It's not. I remember being at my best friend's house when I was like 14, 15 years old. Her mother and her sister left the house. We heard the loudest crash ever. They got into a car accident right at the next stop sign 1 block down. When you're leaving your loved ones, say bye differently, kiss them differently. Tell the people that you love, tell them that you love them in a different way. The person that you need to forgive, let it go. Their sorry is not required to forgive them. People don't have to say that they're sorry for you to forgive them. Stop procrastinating. You owe the world your gifts. Just stop waiting. Make the decision. The provision comes after the decision. Stop waiting for the provision to come first. Make the decision. The provision will come. Step out of your limitations. Break past the barriers that you are allowing to not allow your gifts to flow. You owe the world your gifts, and you owe the world your gifts right now. You don't have to know the how. You just have to be willing to say yes. Allow this tragedy to put you in a position where you are self-analyzing, grade your own paper, and move. Forgive who you have to forgive. Pick up the phone and say sorry to those you offended. Activate that business plan. Get that salon, Dominique. Get it. Let's stop talking about this, right? Spend time with your family. I know it seems like it's necessary right now. I know it seems like it's necessary right now. But you never want to sacrifice precious time with the people that you love anymore, because life can be gone just like that. And so the things that you're working on won't even matter when you're gone. I think it was Sandra that posted this in her stories one day, and it said that your job will be posted faster than your obituary. I'm just going to let that sit for a second. Your job opening, the opening that you caused because you may not be here, your job opening will be posted faster than your obituary. And I know that sounds really negative, but I think it's something that we really have to think about. My mentor said after my aunt passed away, she said, we all will sure die, but we all won't live. We will all die, but we all will not live. The latter part of that statement is our choice. The latter part of that statement is our choice. Are you living? Are you living? We will all surely die, but we all will not choose to live. Allow yourself to cry and mourn another day. Give yourself to the end of this week. Then wipe your eyes and get moving, because there's a world out there that you owe your gifts to, and we're waiting. We are waiting. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's Ask Schellie segment. I appreciate your shares. You can always reach me at www.askschellie.com. You can also reach me at info@askschellie.com. You can call 407-350-5070. We're waiting for you.